So yesterday I watched Beasts of No Nation, which is a 2015 film directed by Cary Fukunaga. It came highly recommended to me and I found it very moving, very well produced and very thought-provoking. And it's for this reason that I wanted to make a video to not only recommend it to you but also to cover some of the themes that are mentioned in Beasts of No Nation. So the film follows the story of Agu, who is a young boy living somewhere in West Africa. Now we get the idea that there is turmoil going on around his village, but his village is protected by EcoMod, which is based on the real-life EcoMog, which is the economic community of West African monitoring group, if I'm remembering correctly, who essentially serve as a kind of defense force in West Africa, at least before the UN took over. So there's Nigerian troops protecting his village. But after we've been introduced to his family and his normal life, playing with the other children in the village and helping his parents and his brother, then the government falls and suddenly we see the EcoMog troops pulling out, and then government forces arrive in the town. There's fighting around the town. He's separated from his mother and his sister, who go to the capital for safety. And then there is fighting happening in his town. Then the government troops that arrive in the town suspect the townspeople of being rebel spies and summarily execute them, including his father and his brother, although Agu manages to flee into the jungle where he's picked up by a rebel group. And this is where he becomes initiated as a child soldier. And I think that's what this film does really, really well, is to show the process from a young boy at the start of the film who is just a normal young lad, and then turning him into slowly a soldier that's fighting for these rebel groups in the jungle, as happens to hundreds of thousands of children in Africa and elsewhere in the world. The reason why many of these military groups choose to recruit child soldiers is because they're very cheap. You don't have to feed them as much. There's lots of children running around, especially, and I think this is one of the big factors for why there are child soldiers in certain parts of the world, is that refugee camps aren't very well guarded. So there's plenty of refugees, plenty of children, so there's plenty of opportunity for them to recruit these children into their ranks. Of course, children are much easier to indoctrinate, and they're much less likely to ask for money for fighting. They're much more likely to do that for supposed moral reasons, like revenge, which is the case here. The commandant asks Agu, don't you want to fight the people who killed your brother and your father? So revenge serves very much as a factor for many of these child soldiers, as well as sort of being psychologically manipulated by various leading figures, as we see happening in Beasts of No Nation. Of course, drugs plays a large part in this as well. In the film, it references, of course, ganja, so marijuana, but more seriously, brown. And brown is an actual substance. It's a mixture of cocaine mixed in with gunpowder. We actually see Agu making this at one point by burning a bullet to get the gunpowder inside that and then mixing it in and absorbing that. And obviously, once a child is hooked on drugs, it's very easy to keep them doing what you want, to keep them obeying commands, because they're hooked on the drug, and if you supply the drug, then they're going to follow whatever you say. And this also brutalizes them to violence, which is another thing. Many of these refugees will have seen violence, as Agu has, and so they become desensitized to it and then become involved in it in their own way, taking part in the violence. A lot of the time what rebel groups will do, as we see portrayed in Beasts of No Nation, is to initiate a child soldier. So in Beasts of No Nation, this is in the form of after the ambush, the commandant gets Agu to kill one of the captives with a machete. I said that very Spanish, machete. But actually what happens in real life a lot of the time is that child soldiers don't necessarily fight for revenge. A very disturbing trend that we've seen with child soldiers in places like the Congo is, for example, that they are abducted from their village, and then that the commanders would force the child soldiers to kill or to maim their own parents or siblings. And then that they would then be so isolated and ostracized from their own community that they could never return, and became reliant on the military group, on the battalion, for essentially their only family. And we do sort of see this in this film as well, where he is enjoying himself with the other boys in the group. But of course, there's a very dark underbelly, is that, you know, they're enjoying themselves, and then in the background they're shooting a captive and this kind of thing. So it's like his childhood, but then it's a perverted version of that. And I think Fukunaga does this very well throughout the film, to show elements of his childhood that continue, but in such a strange and cruel way, that it really is very disturbing to watch. But also, very, very well done, which is why I would recommend it. One thing that Jeffrey Gentleman, who is a journalist who has extensively covered child soldiers in Africa, said that the reason we're seeing such an increase in child soldiers is because a lot of the rebel groups have shifted from having sort of a political or an ideological objective, like overthrowing a government, and they've gone towards actually an economic objective to make money, and that's why there are rebel groups, so they can loot and live off the land essentially, and raid villages and all of this. And I think we do see a shift in the film, whereas at the beginning there are several speeches held both by the commandant and by the preacher about how the NDF, the Native Defense Forces as they're called, are, taking back the government after there's been this coup, but it's all rather vaguely mentioned. There's not really a very clear set of, this is who this group is and this is who this group is, and they're fighting because of this reason. And I think that's very well done within the film. We have the PLF, who seem to be some kind of government militia. They're definitely the enemy to the group that Argu is with, and they refer to them as rebels. Now, I'm guessing that the PLF stands for something like the Patriotic Liberation Front. We're never actually told what it stands for, but there are lots of groups in Africa who have names like this. Another group, which is the enemy group for the rebels, so for Argu's group, who are called rebels by the National Reformation Council, the NRC, seem to be the army who led a coup against the government, and they're not recognised as legitimate by Argu's group. And then, of course, we also have the NDF, the Native Defence Force, which is the group that Argu is a part of, which seems to be lots of militia, which... they sound very similar to several groups in the Congo that are called the Native Defense Forces, or Mai Mai, I think they're also sometimes called, who are a loose group of militias that fight. But I think the clever thing is that they haven't really attached this to any certain country. And I know that Fukunaga extensively studied the civil war in Sierra Leone when he was looking at this, but it's not actually set in Sierra Leone, because it could really be set in any West African country. It could even be Liberia. There was a civil war there for a long time. It could be Guinea-Bissau, and it could even be, if we discount the language and the scenery, this story could be set anywhere from the Democratic Republic of Congo to the Central African Republic, as coups and civil wars, as are shown in Beasts of No Nation, as well as the use of child soldiers, was all in use there. Now, I think another final thing that I thought was very interesting in the film was the kind of the ceremony that they took when they became a member of the militia, which really calls back to these older traditional African pagan beliefs, which are kind of mixed in with Christian values. At the start, we see a kind of association with Christianity at the start when they're in the church, and the father is telling him it's just God testing you, and then the group seems to be rather more kind of mixed in. I think even they're calling the Shahada at one point at the start of the ritual that's going on, but it's definitely infused with some kind of traditional African beliefs. I know you have the Yoruba groups in West Africa mixed in with certain Islamic elements, and then also Christians living there. And Argu is traditionally from this Christian background, but the kind of whole faith side of the story slips away as the story goes on, and then in the end he ends up in a missionary school. Spoiler alert. But I thought that was very interesting, the whole initiation, and how there's the kind of before they go into battle, they do this whole chant thing where they're kind of mentally preparing to go into the battle, which has this whole supernatural, otherworldly feel to it. And also when he's on the brown, how he sees, which is the drugs, that he sees the other soldiers as kind of these demons, these traditional African beings, which is a very interesting layer to the story, which really helps, because I think that's another part of a lot of these conflicts, especially in, I think was it the Congo or the Liberian Civil War. Cannibalism played a huge part in things as well, where they would get child soldiers to eat other people and drink blood and this kind of thing, and this is all linked in with, it will make you stronger, and that kind of traditional belief set, which they mix in with religions like Christianity. So you had what's it called, the Lords, the one in the Congo, you have some very Christian militias, and then in the Central African Republic in the north you have very Muslim militias, and that kind of bleeds into this conflict, as well as then ethnicity, and then of course also the political and ideological goals that these groups have. So I would highly recommend going and giving this film a watch. It's on Netflix, so you can see it there. It's definitely not a light-hearted film, so maybe don't put this on for a first date or anything like that, but it's definitely a very thought-provoking film, and I think it's a very, very well produced film as well. I think I've watched it twice now, and you pick up on a lot more things, very, very clever production and cinematography, and a brilliant score, as well as, of course, bringing these very important issues about child soldiers to the fore and really getting me thinking about that and wanting to make a video about some of the things there. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. Let me know if you've seen it in the comments below, what you thought of it, and any ideas you'd like to share there. Obviously this has been a bit of a darker video, so maybe watch something more cheerful after that. But thank you all for watching. I've been Hilbert, and this has been my opinion on Beasts of No Nation. I'll see you soon.